Alright, so we are going to sacrifice these valve covers to make some see-through ones, just to check the oiling on the top side while we're running it in. So sorry Kylie, but we'll get you new ones. Alright, so I moved this tape line just to retain this bung so we can have a breather. If I cut it out, wouldn't really have a PCV, but for this, don't need it, but be nice to have. So just gonna leave that in. It's not gonna affect our view really that much. So I'm gonna cut this out and then switch over to this one, cut the whole top of it off. So a lot of noise. All right, so I moved my mobile workbench over here so that it's steady, because that one was gonna eat this valve cover at me when this die grinder bit. So I'm gonna start finishing cutting these out. All right, one down, one to go.
All right, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about manifolds before we get this thing crunked up, so to speak. What I've got here in my lap is the older manifolds that were on the car. Now we're going to keep these, put them on Logan's Ranchero initially when we run it in with the other 289. But what I wanted to talk about is why I am using gaskets on this. Now, it is my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but Ford did not use gaskets initially on these engines when they were brand new. But after a little bit of time, your facings on your manifolds can get to where they're pretty trashy and they're not going to seal up. Even with manifold gaskets on, you can see we had a little bit of a leak issue right here on this side. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to put these on now. You have 3 bolt positions that are important on here. You have the 2 outside bolts for your gasket. In other words, your gasket can then slip down on top of it. And then you notice that this bolt hole and this bolt hole are smaller. This will make it a little bit easier to go in and make everything line up a little bit better. What you'll want to initially do is you'll want to start it off with a bolt in the front and a small bolt that has the shank on it like this in the back. These 2 will then go onto the head. It's better to have 4 hands to do this, but it can be done. Much easier on an engine stand than it is in the car. I'm going to get these to pull down just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and stick my gasket on the 2 stud sets. And then the ones with the smaller bolt holes, they're much tighter on the bolt. We'll go ahead and send these home. And what that'll do is it'll keep the gasket from causing you a problem when you're putting the rest of the bolts in. And these just go in fully threaded bolts, and the longer ones and the shorter ones with the shank on them like this go in the short bolt holes. This is a nice kit. This is the Wavelock kit that was used on a little bit later Mustangs, but the manifolds pretty much stayed the same all the way through. So I like using these on here because they'll lock it down a little bit. The only bad thing is we're going to have to lock it down with these manifolds, and we're going to then go in with the high pole manifolds that we got from National Parts Depot when we put it in the car and kind of cover some of the things that can go on when you're using those manifolds in a 67 Mustang. But for right now, we're using the old manifolds because I don't want to smell the stink of the POR 15 manifold paint. Now I'm going to go off camera and tighten all these up and get them set in there, but that kind of gives you a little quick tip on how to put the manifolds on there. All right, while Cam's out there working on the valve cover still, you may be able to hear the slight dentist office noises out there in the yard. That's Cam working on those valve covers, getting them put back on here. What I wanted to talk to you real quickly about, though, is the problems we ran into with some things in relation to doing an engine test stand just like this. We ran into a lot of issues with things like belts, for instance. Because we aren't running an alternator on here, we have no way to tighten a belt on the water pump system like right here. So with that being the case, we had to go and try to find a belt. As of right now, we still don't have one. We've got access to one about an hour away from here, but we're going to try to get that delivered in and get back on that part of it tomorrow so that we can get the engine to start up. But it's really an issue because if you don't put an alternator on, you're going to have problems tightening up the belt. We don't want to put an alternator on because the water pump we have is not the right water pump for the CVF system we have, which is going to cause us to not want to have to put all of that on the front of this engine just so that we can line all that stuff up. Another issue we had with hoses was in fact the lower radiator hose on here. The stock one for a small block 302 won't work with a 428 Cobra Jet radiator, which is what we have on this car. That radiator that we have is supposed to be with a big block 428 390. So we had to punt. Punting became an all-day affair, trying to go to places to find one. If you try to tell them what you're working on, the first thing an auto parts store is going to ask you is, what kind of car is it going on? When in fact, what I needed to find was someone that I could say, I need a 1 3/4 inch inner diameter on both ends and a hose that's about 16 inches long, which is what that one is down there. And it finally works out and we have our hose on there and now we have everything set up to be able to run this. I'm going to tell you right now, one thing that we have, this has been a bigger problem than we thought it was going to be as far as putting everything together and getting it to where it's going to rock and roll and run. So that being said, I'm going to move on to finishing up putting our water system together so that we can run the radiator and not spew fuel fluids everywhere. And I'm going to show you how to put an L hose, bypass hose if you will, from your water neck to your water pump. All right, now the bypass hose on a Ford is actually a lot easier to put on if you have the water pump off. You can do it with the water pump on the car. Now your bypass hose has a smaller end here and a larger end here. The larger end goes on the intake manifold, and what you'll want to do is I'm going to take and mark to right there. I'm going to cut this in segments because these are actually put together or sent out long. And I've got this cutter that I like to use because it'll kind of make a fairly even and straight cut out of it. We'll see what that looks like. Take a little more off. And I'm just going to whittle this thing down till it's the right length, because you don't want to put a kink in this if you can help it. You'll kink it to put it on, but you don't want to kink it when it's on the car. Now don't forget your clamps. These are a little large, to be honest with you. What I like to do is to make sure my clamps are where they'll face up and where they'll face out, to make it a little easier when you're having to go in and replace them. I tend to do this right here so that my clamps are facing out and down, so you just got band on the top and then out this way on the bottom. And then I just tend to neck it on and push this one into place like so. And Viola. Except this one wants the Viola in the wrong way. Doesn't want to be what it's supposed to be. Now I'll take a 5/16 and tighten those down. In a Herculean effort to kill continuity, I am going and getting my hair cut right now in the middle of all this shooting. It's driving me crazy. It's tickling my neck. Going to Brown's Barbershop in Aiken, South Carolina. Been going there for years. Good shop, good haircuts. And just like that, I look semi-respectable again, and now we can get back to work. All right, so what I'm going to talk about right now is Pertronix and plugs, because you can run into a little bit of fun with this. When I went out to the Pertronix site and I actually looked up what they recommend for plug gap on your small block 302 or whatever you're running, they tell you to go with a plug gap that is 0.07 over what the original plug gap was. The problem with a Ford is there's like 3 different plug gaps. You have a 0.25 for a points ignition, you have a 0.45 for DuraSpark, and then the later cars even ran a 0.65. So what do? Well, my opinion on it is I'm going to start off with the base, which is their 0.25, which if you're putting a Pertronix in here, you're replacing a points system. And I am going to then go over that a little bit because they say that that's just a starting point. That's not your final end game. So with that being said, I'm going to go up to a 0.35 in my plugs. And we're basically running a set of Autolites in this thing, just a stock set of plugs to put this thing in play. So I'm going to basically shove these things in the hole and we're going to get going. I do want to talk about one weird thing though. We got 8 plugs from the local auto parts store and 3 of the plugs are just different. They're the same plug, they're all the 666. I'm not real crazy about that number, but it's not my engine, so I'll let it slide. But three different colors, 3 different stampings. The stampings are different. One of them is brighter than the others. It doesn't have the heat ring on it like this one has. This goes back to what we've talked about before with parts supplies, and you just kind of have to run with what you're brung, and that's what we're doing here. I'm hoping all these things are going to fire consistently. I'm pretty sure they will be, but at this point, I don't know. If you want to argue about it in the comments down below about how parts supplies right now really stink, you can do so. All right, one more thing I want to talk about, and that is when you're putting your plugs in, make sure you get a spark plug socket to do this with. And the reason for that is you can actually crack a porcelain if you just do a standard deep well for whatever you're running on your car. If you're running the earlier plugs, you're doing a 3/4 on a Ford. If you're doing the later cylinder heads, you're running a 5/8. So always make sure that your spark plug socket is a spark plug socket, not just a standard 5/8. Tighten these up and we'll get moving on. This is the reason I like test stands. We had a water leak on here, down here on the water pump. I had forgotten to tighten a bolt and we saw the water leak on the floor. If this was inside of an engine bay, the water could have come out, gone down on the chassis. We may not have ever seen it until we were driving the car later and then discovered it. In any case, with it on a test stand, it's really easy to get to anything you might need to do on the lower part of the engine. Even if we need to pull it up off of here and do something to the bottom end for whatever reason, it's easier to do here than it is in the engine of your car. Trust me.
All right, so we are going to prime the oil system. I've got a quarter drive bit extension here, cordless drill, the distributor body's out. I'm going to spin the oil pump drive shaft counterclockwise until I see oil all the way down at the ends of the valve train. The oil circuit in this comes from the pump in the front up to the main circuits and then down. So the last rockers, it's the final bit of the chain. Alright, got oil on this one. And there.
We're getting oil in over here too. A little bit, but not as much.
Back two on my side are still not primed. There's the back one getting oil. That one. Got one rocker on this side. It still does not have oil. Got one on yours.
You want me to take over on the drill so you can watch it?
Nah, that's fine. I think those lifters are in the wrong spot to get oil past them.
Okay.
Because only this one, oh no, that one got oil. So 1, 2, looks like 3 of them haven't popped up yet. All right, so I'm going to carefully pull this out. And now we can stick the distributor back in it and get it ready to fire.
Yay. Off camera, we decided to roll the engine over to top dead center. We ran into a problem. The engine wouldn't budge. We shook our noodles around trying to figure it out. Cam and I were frustrated, and then this happened. All right, so what we've got going on here, I think, is the fact that we have a mid plate that is not bored correctly. It seems like to me that the starter bore on it is over to the inside enough that we're actually getting contact with the flywheel on the starter. Even if I went and I clearance this section here, it's not going to make any difference because it's going to still have an issue with that. So once again, we're at a standstill. You know what? I'm done.